People think peace comes with age, that the storms calm, that the betrayals stay buried in youth. But they're wrong. The deepest cut didn't come from a stranger or an enemy or some thief in the night. It came from across my own dinner table, wrapped in family smiles and empty questions that night. Didn't begin with shouting or sirens. It began with the sound of a fork gently tapping porcelain, and a question that should have meant nothing instead. It cracked open everything I'd built: the trust, the silence, the belief that love alone could protect what matters most. I didn't go looking for a fight, but something in his eyes told me I couldn't afford to stay blind too long. So I watched. Quietly, I waited, and when it was time, I didn't yell, I didn't warn, I just laid the trap and waited for the truth to walk right into it. This story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when you're forced to choose between protecting the people you love or pretending everything's fine, if you've ever been blindsided by someone who knew your weaknesses better than they knew your heart. This one's for you. Tap like if this story speaks to something buried in you. Hit subscribe if you want to see how deep it goes, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And when you first felt something shift, I'll be reading everyone. We were halfway through dinner when he dropped the question like a hammer wrapped in velvet. I just picked up my fork when Greg, with that too smooth tone he used when he wanted to seem casual, said, "So Frank, what kind of lock do you have on that safe upstairs?" For a moment, everything went quiet. Emily blinked. I paused mid-motion. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan overhead. That safe hadn't been mentioned in years. It wasn't common knowledge, not even to most of my friends. Emily, sure, she knew about it in passing. But Greg? He shouldn't have. I looked at him over the rim of my glasses, trying to read more than his smile. "What kind of question is that?" Emily asked, half laughing like she thought he was joking. "Just curious," he said, looking straight at me, never breaking eye contact. With all the break-ins around here lately, it just got me thinking. You know how it is. The fork was still in my hand, unmoving. I kept my voice steady. "Break-ins?" I repeated. "Haven't heard about any." "Oh, they probably keep it out of the news," Greg said, waving his hand vaguely like that made it true. "So people don't panic. But a guy your age, living alone in a house like this, you'd be a prime target." He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Emily shifted beside him, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad's always been careful. He keeps everything locked." "Sure," Greg said, nodding like it was a compliment. "But what about insurance? If something happened to you, Emily would need to know where everything important is kept. Your will, your savings, your valuables. Especially that safe." I felt my chest tighten just a little, not from fear, but from the way his words probed pride. "I've got everything organized," I said carefully. "Emily knows what she needs to know." "But does she know about the key?" he asked, tilting his head, still wearing that pleasant expression. "What key?" Emily said, her eyes darting between us. "The one in your dad's dresser drawer," Greg said too quickly. "You know, the one that, how do you know what's in my bedroom drawer?" I cut in, my voice sharper than intended. That was no innocent mistake. That was knowledge he wasn't supposed to have. Greg froze for a half second, just enough time for the mask to crack. I saw it in his eyes, surprise, then calculation. "Oh," he said smoothly. "I was looking for aspirin last week. You told me to check the bathroom, but I opened the wrong drawer. Total accident." Emily nodded. "That's right. You had that awful headache after dinner. You were upstairs forever." I remembered that night. He claimed stomach trouble. Was gone for nearly half an hour. More than enough time to dig through my things. "The aspirin's in the medicine cabinet," I said quietly. "It always has been." Greg gave a short laugh, forced. Must have been out of it from the pain. I wasn't thinking straight. He stabbed at his mashed potatoes, trying to act normal. But I was watching closely now. I watched how he kept steering the conversation back to my routines. Greg was fitting neatly into one I'd seen 100 times before. the desperate opportunist. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. But when morning came, I got out of bed with a heaviness in my chest that hadn't been there the day before. The sun was shining through the bedroom window, but it did nothing to lift the sense of unease I carried with me as I began my usual routine. Coffee, toast, check the mailbox. Except today, something was off. I walked back upstairs with my coffee in hand, and as I passed the threshold of my bedroom, a chill ran through me. The door was cracked open just slightly, maybe 2 inches. That might seem like nothing to most people, but I've lived alone for over 4 decades, and certain habits become law. I always close my door completely. Always. No exceptions. That gap told me someone had been in here. My body tensed as I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room with sharp precision. At first glance, everything looked normal. The bed was still made the way I left it. My reading glasses rested on the nightstand, right where I placed them the night before. The lamp stood straight, but as I walked past the end of the bed toward the dresser, I saw it. The second drawer from the top, the one where I kept my financial documents and the small brass key, wasn't flush with the rest. It was pushed in, but not all the way. My pulse quickened. I knelt down and opened it fully, heart thudding in my chest. At first, it looked like everything was still there. Folders stacked neatly, manila tabs labeled with black ink. But then I noticed a few of them were out of order. My will, usually kept in the back folder, had migrated toward the front. Insurance forms were mixed in with bank statements. It wasn't a mess, but it wasn't how I left it. Someone had rifled through them. Not haphazardly, either. This was methodical, targeted. Someone looking for something specific. My fingers moved to the underside of the drawer lip, where I always taped the safe key. It was a simple habit, one I never thought twice about. But when I reached under it, all I felt was wood. The tape was gone. The key was gone. My stomach dropped. I checked again, running my fingers along the underside, hoping maybe it had slipped off and fallen inside. Nothing. The key wasn't misplaced. It had been taken. I sat back on my heels, breathing slowly, trying to keep calm. The safe was still in the closet, bolted securely to the floor and wall studs. It had a digital lock and a manual override, only accessible with a key that was no longer in my possession. I stood and walked into the closet to check. The digital pad was untouched, the safe door still closed. But that didn't comfort me. If Greg had the key, he didn't need to touch the pad. He could open it any time he wanted, and if I wasn't careful, I'd never know. I closed the drawer slowly, deliberately, making sure everything looked the way it had before. Let him think I hadn't noticed. That was the only edge I had now. If Greg believed he was still operating in secret, he might get sloppy. I walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My mind was racing. The implications were enormous. Greg hadn't just been curious. This wasn't a casual wander through a father-in-law's bedroom. This was planned, premeditated, calculated. He'd waited until Emily and I were distracted, likely while she and I were preparing dinner, or after she'd gone to bed and I was still downstairs watching the news. He'd been timing his moves, observing my habits. He knew when I left the house, how long I stayed out, how often I checked the safe, and where I kept the key. That kind of attention to detail didn't happen overnight. He'd been plotting this for weeks, maybe even before they moved in. I lay in bed, lights off, covers pulled over me, heart beating steadily but alert to every creak and thump of the old house. When you've lived somewhere long enough, you know the difference between a home settling into night and a footstep trying not to be heard. It was a little after 11 when I first heard it. The faint groan of floorboards from the hallway, followed by careful, padded footsteps descending the stairs. I turned my head toward the heating vent in the wall beside my bed, the one that connected directly to the living room below. The old ductwork carried sound well. Over the years, I'd heard late-night television, phone calls, even whispers when Emily used to sneak snacks as a teenager. I got out of bed as silently as possible and slid across the floor in my socks, phone in hand. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want Greg to know I was awake. I crouched beside the vent and pressed my ear close. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then his voice low and steady. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep." My blood ran cold. I couldn't hear who was on the other end, but it was clear this wasn't a casual conversation. This was secrecy. This was planning. "The old man's definitely loaded," Greg said, a hint of excitement in his tone. "I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole thing. We're talking serious money here." My grip on the phone tightened. I opened the voice recording app with shaking fingers and hit record. Whatever came next, I needed proof. "Tomorrow night's perfect," Greg continued. "Emily's going to her book club meeting. She's out from 7 to 9 like clockwork. Gives us a clear window." I could hear movement downstairs, the sound of him shifting, maybe pacing. I already have the safe key. Grabbed it earlier today while they were having dinner. The old fool keeps everything important in there. Cash, jewelry, probably more bank info. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Fool. That's what he thought of me. Greg wasn't just some naive young man making a bad decision. He was cold. He was a predator, and he was using my daughter to shield himself. "Look," he said after a pause, "I know you're worried about the timeline, but my gambling debts aren't going away. Those guys want their money, and they want it now." That explained the desperation, the sudden move into my home, the calculated friendliness. This wasn't about opportunity. This was about survival, his survival at my expense. "David's just some lonely old widower," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "Probably grateful for the company. He has no idea what's coming. Hell, he practically handed me the information I needed tonight. Asked me about home security at dinner." I pressed my hand against the floor to keep myself from punching the vent in fury. I had invited this man into my house. I had let him eat at my table. I had offered him shelter when he claimed to need it. And all the while, he was cataloging my weaknesses like items on a list. "The beauty is," Greg said, "he'll never suspect family. Even if he notices something's missing, Emily will just convince him he misplaced it. You know how old people get about their memory." The sneer in his voice was unmistakable. I was being reduced to a stereotype, a confused, fading old man too foggy to track his own life. Except I wasn't confused. I wasn't fading, and I was tracking everything. "Trust me," Greg added, "by Thursday we'll be out." I knew now that I couldn't simply wait and hope for the best. I had to move quickly, precisely, and with the same level of calculation that Greg thought he'd mastered. I slipped out of bed and moved quietly downstairs. The house was still and dark, and I took every step with practiced silence. In the kitchen, I made coffee like always, but this morning it was more ritual than routine. The warmth of the mug in my hands grounded me, but it didn't ease the weight in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table and listened carefully. No movement upstairs. Emily and Greg were still asleep. I used the time to write down a plan. Not a complete blueprint, but enough to keep me focused. I needed 3 things. 1, undeniable evidence of Greg's intent and action. 2, a way to catch him in the act without putting Emily in harm's way. And 3, a way to ensure that no matter what happened next, Greg couldn't talk his way out of it. I went back upstairs and entered my bedroom, closing the door behind me without a sound. My dresser drawer still looked untouched. The fake key I planned to plant there later would look exactly like the real one Greg had stolen, just enough to tempt him into making his move at the exact time I expected. I stood in front of the safe for a few minutes, trying to see it through Greg's eyes. He thought it was a jackpot. He had no idea the most valuable thing inside wasn't cash or jewelry. It was the trail of breadcrumbs I was about to lay. I retrieved a stack of decoy documents, The kind of things that looked legitimate at a glance, but would mean nothing outside this house. A few old bank statements from closed accounts, expired insurance policies, a fake investment report I'd typed up on my old computer using a believable template. These are the trophies Greg would think he was stealing. I put them into a folder marked Estate Planning Confidential and placed it in the safe where it would be easy to grab in a hurry. After that, I went to my closet, pulled out a small, dusty lockbox, and opened it with a key I wore on a chain around my neck. Inside were 2 backup USB recorders I'd used in my old job. I tested both. They still worked. I tucked one under the lip of my nightstand drawer, carefully angled to pick up audio from anywhere in the room. I would place the other one in the hallway, camouflaged beneath the rug runner, to capture his footsteps and entry. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I checked the time. 6:47 a.m. Emily usually came downstairs around 7:30. I had a half hour to get the most important piece of this plan into motion. The trap. I needed something that would both expose Greg and make denial impossible. I'd seen plenty of thieves try to explain away missing items, deleted files, tampered evidence, but they couldn't explain a visual. And they definitely couldn't explain being caught in a physical moment of violation. That's when the idea struck me. Not subtle, not quiet, something theatrical, something that would leave a mark. I drove to the hardware store in town as soon as it opened. I told Emily I needed parts for a leaky pipe in the basement. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and told me to be careful. Greg barely looked up from his phone. At the store, I walked directly to the party aisle and picked up a spring-loaded confetti cannon meant for gender reveals. It wasn't big, but it was loud and messy. Then I found a small bag of ultra-fine glitter, silver and gold. Cheap, clingy, and impossible to remove without a full shower and 20 minutes of scrubbing. I also bought some basic rigging supplies, a trigger wire, a bracket, and a tiny hinge. Back home, I headed straight to my workshop in the basement and got to work. The pressure trigger I had installed inside the drawer would only activate if someone reached directly into the back where I used to keep the real safe key, not from casual movement or accidental contact. I tested it with a wooden spoon, then my own hand, and finally the same model of dummy key I planned to leave as bait, making sure everything was positioned just right. Each time, the cannon launched a blast of gold and silver glitter that stuck to skin, clothes, and even hair. It was clingy, impossible to brush off easily, and, most importantly, irrefutable. I wanted the mess to be spectacular, impossible to hide or explain. Greg would look like he'd lost a fight with a craft store explosion. Back upstairs, I opened my dresser drawer slowly and cleared out enough space at the back to conceal the device beneath a stack of old photographs and unused cufflinks. I placed the cannon, rearmed the spring, and rigged the trigger in position. Then I tucked the dummy key into a shallow compartment right above the pressure plate, just close enough to make him reach for it. I placed a few harmless decoy items around it to make the drawer look natural. A rubber band ball, a broken watch, some faded receipts. Everything appeared ordinary. No visible wires. No warning signs. From the outside, it looked like a typical drawer in an old man's bedroom. And that was exactly the illusion I needed. Greg thought he was dealing with someone senile, someone set in his ways, someone too proud or too old to notice he was being manipulated. That illusion had become my shield, and I had no intention of dropping it until the exact second he triggered the trap. After I confirmed the cannon was secure, I closed the drawer gently and stood there staring at it. It looked so mundane, harmless even, and yet inside was the mechanism that would change everything. My only regret was that I couldn't watch his face the moment it went off. That regret didn't last long, because that's when I remembered the camera. I rushed back downstairs, grabbed my keys, and told Emily I had one last errand to run. She was folding laundry in the living room and barely looked up. Greg, sitting across from her, was thumbing through his phone with that glazed over look that told me he thought the world owed him something. I didn't say much, just that I'd be home soon. They didn't ask where I was going. At the electronics store, I met a helpful young employee named Jordan who showed me a selection of compact wireless cameras. I picked one that offered motion activated recording, night vision, and 8 hours of battery life. It was the size of a deck of cards and came with a magnetic mount. Perfect. I paid cash, not wanting any paper trail, and drove home with the camera resting in the seat beside me like it was the final piece of a chessboard. Back in my bedroom, I unpacked the box and examined the device. It was sleek, dark, and would be nearly invisible if placed correctly. I tried several mounting locations using the live feed on my phone to test angles. The top of the bookshelf gave a skewed view. Behind the lamp was too exposed. Finally, I found a sweet spot, wedged between two thick hardcovers on my nightstand, tilted just enough to capture the entire dresser in the middle of the room. The black casing blended in with the shadows. Unless Greg was actively searching for a camera, he wouldn't see it. I adjusted the focus and set the camera to record on motion. Then I tested the feed in the dark with the bedroom lights off. The infrared night vision was crystal clear. Any movement in that drawer would be captured in perfect detail. I tested the audio function next. I wanted to ensure it could pick up Greg's voice if he mumbled something or even talked to himself. Desperate people often did. The clarity was excellent. Satisfied, I charged the battery to full and switched it into standby mode. That persona would be my armor tonight, and I had to make it bulletproof. I started the coffee pot, made my usual breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, and greeted Emily when she shuffled into the kitchen, hair tied up and sleep still clinging to her face. "Morning, sweetheart," I said with practiced warmth, careful not to let a trace of tension show. "Sleep well." "Like a baby," she said, pouring herself coffee and leaning against the counter. A few minutes later, Greg joined us. His eyes were sharp, alert behind the lazy smile he wore. He was assessing me, reading my mood, watching for anything that might tip him off. I gave him nothing. "Morning, Frank," he said casually. "Plans for the day?" "Oh, the usual," I replied, buttering my toast. "Might run some errands. Maybe the bank, maybe the hardware store." I let the sentence hang. His smile faltered for a split second. "Everything okay?" he asked, forcing a sip of coffee. "Of course," I said, meeting his gaze for a moment too long, then shifting away. "Just a few things I've been meaning to take care of." Emily chimed in with a laugh. "Dad's old school. Still checks his accounts in person." "Nothing wrong with being careful," Greg said, voice a little too eager. "With all the identity theft these days, it's smart to keep an eye on things. Especially at your age." I nodded. "That's exactly what I think." He leaned forward slightly. "And you're safe. You said the digital lock still works, right? I've been reading about people switching to biometric ones now. Might be more secure." I feigned interest. "That's so. I'll look into it." His eyes flicked toward Emily, who was busy scrolling through her phone. "Speaking of security, I might stay up late tonight. Watch a little TV in the living room. I'll keep an eye on things. You never know." I gave him a grateful nod. "Appreciate it." Inside, I was boiling. The man who was planning to rob me had the gall to offer protection. That was the depth of his deceit. I needed to make sure I gave him nothing to doubt. After breakfast, I went about my day as I normally would. I drove to the grocery store and picked up a few things we didn't need, just to keep up appearances. I stopped by the post office, waved at a neighbor, and even bought a crossword puzzle book from the pharmacy. Back home, I pretended to be tired. I pretended to forget where I'd left my reading glasses, and I let Greg see me yawn 3 times before dinner. I was building a story he could rely on, that I was slowing down, that I was fading, that he had timed this just right. At dinner, Emily chatted about her upcoming book club meeting and mentioned she'd be leaving around 6:45. Greg didn't say much, but I saw the flicker of satisfaction cross his face. It was happening. The wheels were turning in his head. His opportunity was drawing closer, and he believed everything was lining up in his favor. After dinner, I made a show of being worn out. I stood slowly, rubbed my lower back, and sighed like a man who had truly hit his limit. "I think I'll turn in early tonight," I said. "Didn't sleep great last night. Must be the weather." "You sure, Dad?" Emily asked. "I can make you some tea." "No, no," I said, waving her off. "I'll be out like a light. Maybe even take something to help me sleep." Greg perked up. "Sleeping pills. Doctor gave them to me last month. Strong stuff. One of those, and I won't hear a thing until morning." I delivered the line smoothly and watched him absorb the information. He tried to hide it, but I saw his shoulders relax ever so slightly. Emily leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Good night, Dad. Sweet dreams." Greg carried a few dishes to the sink. "You rest easy, Frank. I'll be up a while. Don't worry about a thing." "Appreciate it," I said, then headed upstairs. In my bedroom, I closed the door halfway, just like I had the night before, giving him the same opening he'd already violated once. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and pretended to settle in for the night. But I didn't lie down. Not yet. I double-checked the camera angle using my phone. The feed was perfect. The drawer was clearly visible, the trigger mechanism armed and ready. The glitter bomb waited like a loaded spring. I turned off the lights and positioned myself in bed, fully dressed beneath the covers, phone hidden in my hand, facing the hallway where I could see the faint glow of the nightlight. Downstairs, I heard the television click on. Greg was setting the stage, making noise so Emily would believe he was just relaxing, waiting for her to leave. Then I heard her footsteps going up to the guest room. The door closed. Silence returned. Greg was alone now, waiting, calculating. I stayed still, breathing evenly, heartbeat steady. Outside, wind rustled faintly against the windows, and inside, the house settled into that deep, silent tension that only came around 2 or 3 in the morning. At exactly 2:43 a.m., the hallway groaned faintly, just once. My eyes snapped to the feed, and my ears strained through the thick silence of the house. A shadow passed the crack in my door, cautious and deliberate. Not Emily's soft, familiar footsteps, but something heavier, slower, more calculated. Greg was coming. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I could almost feel his presence through the air itself, like the way a predator feels another creature's heartbeat in the stillness of a hunt. My door handle turned ever so slowly, and the door creaked open by inches, exactly as I had left it, just enough to invite him into what he believed was a crime of opportunity. Greg paused in the doorway, backlit by the soft yellow night light behind him. His silhouette was slim, shoulders hunched forward, and for a long 30 seconds he stood frozen, scanning the darkness, trying to confirm what he hoped to see. An old man asleep and unaware, snoring gently through a chemically induced sleep. I kept my chest rising and falling in slow rhythm, my hand under the pillow gripping the phone, but not moving. He stepped inside. His sneakers made almost no sound, but to me, every shift of his weight, every intake of breath, was as loud as a bell. He moved across the room like a practiced thief, which chilled me more than I anticipated. He had done this before. Maybe not to family, maybe not in a house like mine, but he had the methodical caution of someone who knew how to avoid creaks in floorboards and how to breathe without drawing attention. Greg went straight to the dresser. He didn't hesitate. He didn't glance at anything else. His hands moved with purpose, opening the drawer I had so carefully rigged. I saw it on the camera feed just before it happened. His right hand reached toward the back of the drawer, exactly where the key used to be, where the fake one now sat just above the trigger plate. His fingers closed around it. A split second later, the trap sprang to life. A loud pop echoed through the room like a firecracker, followed by an explosion of silver and gold glitter that erupted from the drawer and engulfed his face and torso. The blast wasn't dangerous, but it was loud enough to wake the house and messy enough to coat him head to toe in shimmering, undeniable evidence of his crime. Greg screamed, not in pain, but in panic, stumbling back from the drawer and slapping wildly at his face and shirt. Glitter clung to his skin, his hair, his clothes, and in the dim light, he looked like a human disco ball caught mid-meltdown. I sat up slowly, blinking as if just now waking from a deep sleep. "What in God's name?" I said, turning on my bedside lamp and staring at him in mock confusion. Greg froze, wide-eyed and wild-looking, his hands covered in gold specks and his shirt dusted with silver. I heard noise," he stammered. "Thought someone broke in. So, you came into my bedroom?" I asked, my voice low and steady, perfectly controlled. "And opened my dresser?" He was still brushing at the glitter as if it would somehow disappear. I thought maybe someone was hiding in here. Or maybe they took something. I got scared. In the middle of the night, I tilted my head. "Greg, it's almost 3 in the morning. Why would anyone be hiding in my dresser drawer?" Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Emily's voice, worried and sharp, called from the guest room. "Dad, what was that noise?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I called back. "Greg just had a little accident." She appeared in the doorway seconds later, robe half-tied, eyes wide with alarm. But then she saw him, her husband, covered in glitter, standing beside my open drawer with a look of horror and panic stretched across his face. "Greg," she said, stunned. What is all over you?" He looked at her, his face contorting between desperation and embarrassment. Something went off in the drawer. "I thought you opened his drawer?" she asked, stepping into the room. "At 3 in the morning? What the hell were you doing in here?" "I thought I heard something," he repeated. "Maybe someone was in the house. I wanted to check." "So you skipped the front door, skipped the windows, skipped every other room, and went straight to his dresser?" she asked, her tone turning sharp. "Why? I don't know," he said, rubbing his glitter-covered hands on his pants. "I just panicked. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know." I watched her take it in, her gaze shifting from Greg to the open drawer to the faint trail of glitter on the floor behind him. Then she turned to me. "Dad, did you set up a trap in your drawer?" "I had to," I said simply. "Things have been going missing, and I needed to know who's been going through my stuff." "You think I've been stealing from you?" Greg snapped. "I was trying to protect you." "No," I said calmly. "I think you've been planning something, and I think you're about to regret it." I reached beneath the pillow and pulled out my phone. "I have a recording I'd like you to hear." Greg's eyes went wide. "Wait, no. Frank, hold on." Emily looked between us. "Recording?" she said. "Of what?" "Of your husband," I said, unlocking the device and pressing play. He didn't say a word for a long moment, and the silence that filled the room wasn't empty. It was full of disbelief, betrayal, and something even colder, the slow realization that what once might have been excused as a misunderstanding or an unfortunate accident had just solidified into an undeniable truth. Gambling debts. Emily's voice cracked when she finally spoke, her words as quiet as they were heavy. "You were going to rob my father?" Greg took a step forward, his glitter-speckled hand raised as if to offer comfort. But Emily flinched back, wrapping her robe tighter around herself like she needed armor to survive this moment. "Emily," Greg said softly, "please listen to me. It's not what it sounds like. It's not what it sounds like," she cut in sharply, her voice suddenly rising. "Because it sounds like you were planning to rob my father blind and then lie to my face while you ran away with stolen money. So please, Greg, explain how that's not what it sounds like." Greg's jaw clenched and unclenched, and I saw something in his face shift, the panic folding into defensiveness, the mask trying to return. I was under pressure, he snapped. You don't know what it's like, Emily. I didn't ask for this. I didn't plan for this. Those people I owe money to don't, she interrupted, stepping forward now, eyes blazing. Don't you dare blame anyone but yourself. I trusted you. I brought you into my father's home, and you used me. You used both of us. Her voice broke at the end, and I wanted to reach out to her, but I knew she needed to finish this herself. Greg dropped his arms to his sides, his glitter-covered palms open as if appealing for mercy. We can still fix this, he said, quieter now. We can talk this through. Maybe go to counseling. I can explain everything. This doesn't have to end like this. End like what? Emily demanded. You mean with you caught red-handed in my father's bedroom at 3 in the morning, covered in glitter from a security trap? Or maybe you mean the part where he played a recording of your entire robbery plan. Which part exactly doesn't it have to end like? Greg turned to me, and for the first time since he'd entered my home, I saw real fear on his face. Not the kind born from embarrassment or guilt, but from knowing the game was truly over. Frank, he said, his voice pleading, please don't press charges. This was a mistake. A bad mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I stared at him, silent for a beat too long, then said, You thought I was asleep. You thought I was too old, too slow, too trusting to notice. But I noticed everything. And now Emily does too. Greg turned back to her. It's my debt. I didn't know what else to do. They threatened me. I was trying to fix it. By stealing from my family? She asked, her voice now cold, flat, dangerously calm. By lying to me about everything for weeks? How much do you even owe? Greg hesitated. 47,000. Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it, just disbelief and bitterness. $47,000? That's what this was all about. I thought I could win it back, he said, eyes flicking around the room like he was still looking for an escape route. I was going to fix it before you ever found out. And what if my father hadn't set up that trap? She asked. What if he hadn't recorded your phone call? Would you have just disappeared with me, dragged me into hiding, built our future on a lie? I was desperate, he said. I made a mistake. You made a choice, she snapped. And now you're going to live with the consequences. Her hands were shaking, but her voice never wavered again. Get out. Greg's eyes widened. Emily, please. I said get out, she repeated, this time with fire in her voice, steel in her spine. Pack your things. Leave this house. Now. He didn't move at first, still staring at her like he could somehow will her anger away. But I knew what he saw. He saw a woman who had finally crossed the threshold between heartbreak and resolve, who had realized that the man she married had been wearing a mask from the beginning, and that woman wasn't going to give him another chance. Greg looked at me again, one last desperate glance, glitter still stuck to his forehead and neck like guilt made visible. You ruined this, he said bitterly. You turned her against me. You did that yourself, I said, not even raising my voice. All I did was show her the truth. He stood there for another 5 seconds, then slowly turned and walked out. The glitter trailed behind him like a signature, like breadcrumbs of betrayal. A few minutes later, we heard the sound of the guest room door slamming, drawers being yanked open, zippers ripping closed. Then the front door opened and shut, and the house fell into a silence, so deep it felt like we'd stepped into a new world. Emily stood in my room for a long time, staring at the floor. The door closed behind Greg with a finality that echoed through the walls. And though the glitter on the floor still shimmered in the early morning light like the aftermath of a celebration, there was no joy in the air, only the heavy silence left in the wake of betrayal. Emily hadn't said a word since we stood in my bedroom together, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold her own body together. Her eyes fixed on the front door, as if part of her was still waiting for him to turn around and make it all a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one Greg had made long before the glitter had given him away. And now the man she thought she had married was nothing more than a trail of broken promises and cheap lies leading out of my house like crumbs of guilt. I followed her into the kitchen, where she sat down at the table without saying anything, staring blankly at the wall. I poured her a cup of coffee and set it gently in front of her, not pushing, not asking, just being present in the way she needed me to be. After a long moment, she looked at me and said in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, "I brought him into your home." "Sweetheart," I said softly, sitting down across from her, "you had no way of knowing." "I should have," she replied, eyes brimming with unshed tears. There were signs. The phone calls he always took outside. The way he kept asking about your finances. I just didn't want to see it. "We all want to believe the best in the people we love," I said. "That's not a flaw. That's who you are." She wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself, but her hands were still trembling. "How long have you suspected?" "Since the night he asked about the safe," I admitted. "But I didn't have proof then. Only instincts." "And the glitter bomb?" she asked, almost smiling. "That was inspired." I gave a small chuckle, the sound strange in the stillness of the room. Sometimes justice needs a little sparkle. The faint smile disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by a deep weariness. "What do I do now?" she asked, not looking at me. "Where do I go?" "You stay here," I said without hesitation. "This is your home too, for as long as you need." "I can't believe he was going to use me like that," she whispered. "Drag me off to another state. Probably let me think you'd just forgotten where you put things. Also, he could steal from you." "He underestimated both of us," I said. "He thought I wouldn't notice, and he thought you wouldn't believe me. But we're not that easy to fool." She took a long sip of coffee and stared out the window, the light catching in her hair as the sun finally broke through the morning haze. "He said he owed $47,000 to gamblers, dangerous people, and now he's out there alone with that debt," I said. "No money from me, no alibi, no place to hide." "What if they come looking for him?" she asked suddenly, alarm in her voice. "What if they come here?" "They won't," I said calmly. "They want their money, not a fight. And Greg doesn't have anything left to offer them here. He'll run. People like him always do." She nodded slowly, but I could see the fear hadn't fully left her. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "You're safe now. He's gone." A few hours later, the house felt different. Lighter somehow. I vacuumed the glitter trail out of the hallway and swept the rest from the bedroom floor. Each sparkling speck a reminder of how close we'd come to losing something far more important than money. Trust, security, family. Emily stayed quiet most of the day, occasionally helping with chores, mostly just moving from room to room like someone slowly relearning how to breathe. When the doorbell rang around 4, she jumped, but it was just the mailman. Still, the tension lingered like smoke. That night, over a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Emily finally said, "I'm going to file for divorce." I looked up and met her eyes. There was no sadness in them now, only resolve. "I think that's the right choice." "He lied about everything," she continued. "His job, our finances, us. I don't even know if any of it was real." "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," I said. "One step at a time." "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly, "for protecting me, for seeing what I couldn't." "That's what parents do," I said. "We see the storm coming, even when our kids are dancing in the sunshine." Later that evening, I walked out to the front porch and sat with a glass of iced tea, watching the street as the last rays of sunlight turned the pavement gold. The neighborhood was peaceful again. The quiet hum of crickets in the bushes, the occasional bark of a dog down the street. the world returning to normal 1 hour at a time. I heard the door creak behind me and felt Emily's presence as she sat down in the chair next to mine. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. Inside the house, Greg's old suitcase sat by the door, packed hastily and left behind. He must have been too panicked to grab everything. Emily had said we should throw it out, but I told her we'd let him come collect it from the driveway, if he had the guts to show his face. When I finally stood to head inside, I caught a glimpse of glitter still stuck to the porch rail, a tiny fleck that had made its way outside somehow. I smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes with a spring-loaded surprise and a lesson in humility. 3 months passed, not in a blur, but in a slow and steady rebuilding that came with early mornings, small conversations over coffee, and the kind of quiet healing that doesn't demand attention but leaves a lasting mark. Emily stayed in the house, just as I had promised her she could, and in time, she found a rhythm again. The woman who once sat silently at the kitchen table after her world collapsed began to come back to life in small, meaningful ways. She organized the hall closet, took over the gardening I had long neglected, and even began working part-time at the local library, a job that gave her peace, structure, and a place to breathe outside the walls where everything had fallen apart. I didn't ask questions. I simply watched, supported, and showed up every day as the father she needed, the kind of steady presence she could hold on to while she redefined what stability meant. We didn't talk about Greg much. His name became something that only lived in paperwork and court filings, and in quiet moments we both prefer to leave in the past. The divorce had gone through faster than expected. He didn't contest anything, probably because he didn't have the money or the pride left to fight. The last I heard, he had fled to another state, chasing the next bad decision, and I imagined that the trail of glitter he left behind in my home haunted him in ways he wouldn't admit. That image comforted me more than I cared to explain. One evening, Emily and I were sitting on the back porch with mugs of chamomile tea in our hands, the air cool and the sky painted in dusky pink and gold. She looked over at me and said, "Do you think I'll ever trust someone again?" I didn't answer right away because it wasn't a question that wanted reassurance. It wanted truth. "I think trust isn't something you lose all at once," I said. "It's more like it gets bruised. And bruises heal, even the deep ones, but you have to let them. You don't force it. You don't rush it. You let time do its job." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. He made me question everything I thought I knew about love, about judgment, even about myself. "That's what manipulators do," I said. "They erode your confidence quietly until you don't even recognize the cracks. But you found the truth, and you didn't run from it. That takes strength most people never discover." She gave me a soft smile, the kind that still held a shadow of sadness, but also something lighter underneath. "You're a wise man, Dad." I chuckled. "No, I'm just a man who got lucky enough to have a daughter who listens, eventually." That made her laugh, and it was real, and it was good, and it reminded me why I had gone through all the trouble of setting that glitter trap in the first place. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to preserve something sacred. Our trust, our safety, the home we had built and rebuilt after so much life had passed through it. And that home, while still standing on the same foundation, had changed. Not just because of what we had lost, but because of what we had learned. There's something about catching someone in the act, about exposing their worst intentions in the brightest, most undeniable way possible, that resets your belief in justice. It's not always served by judges or police. Sometimes justice is a father setting a trap, a camera rolling in the dark, and the sound of a glitter bomb marking the exact moment a mask falls off. One morning, I received a call from Mrs. Dunley down the street. asking if I'd help her install a basic security system. She had heard, through the grapevine, that I was pretty handy when it came to creative home protection, and while I didn't confirm or deny the rumors, I agreed to help. When I arrived at her place, she handed me a small bag of confetti and winked. "Just in case," she said. That made me laugh harder than I had in weeks. Word gets around in a small town, especially when someone like Greg tries to pull something like that under the roof of someone who used to chase insurance fraud for a living. People started calling me Glitter Frank, a nickname I didn't exactly love, but one I accepted because it meant people understood. When you push a good man too far, even the quiet ones, even the kind ones, eventually push back. Emily began writing again, little essays and short stories she kept in a notebook by her bed. She shared one with me about a woman who rediscovers herself after uncovering her husband's secrets. And though she didn't use real names, I could see myself in the pages, and I could see her heart, bruised but open. One evening, as she headed out to host a small book club meeting at the library, she paused at the door and said, "You know, the glitter took weeks to clean out of the baseboards. I still find pieces in my shoes sometimes." I grinned. That's the beauty of glitter. It sticks. It reminds you. It doesn't let you forget. She kissed my cheek and left, and I stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching her walk away with confidence in her step, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not pride, something deeper. Peace. That night, I made myself a cup of cocoa and sat in my armchair with a newspaper, my phone on the table beside me. The same phone that had once held Greg's damning recording. I still had the file saved, not because I planned to use it again, but because it served as a reminder of what I had protected, of how close we came to losing everything to someone who wore a smile and carried a knife behind his back. The house was quiet now, but not empty. It was filled with the sounds of a life returning, of laughter in the mornings, of the vacuum running upstairs, of Emily singing to herself when she thought I couldn't hear. These were the sounds of survival, of choosing not to be victims, of owning the narrative instead of being crushed by it. I looked around at the pictures on the walls, the books on the shelves, the sunlight catching on the polished wood floors, and I thought about everything we had gone through. And in that moment, I realized that justice had come not in spite of the glitter, but because of it. Because sometimes when truth explodes out of hiding, it doesn't just sting, it sparkles. The end. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild, glitter-filled ride. If you're still here, I've got a question for you. Did you see it coming? At what point did you think Greg had crossed the line for good? Was it when he asked about my safe? Or when the glitter hit the fan? Literally? I'd love to know what you thought was the turning point. And tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop in the comments. I actually do read them. If you enjoyed this story, if it made you pause, made you smirk, or made you think twice about who you let into your house, go ahead and hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. And if you want to hear what happened next, or what nearly happened that no one else knew about, make sure you subscribe. Because I've got more stories. And some of them, they're even messier than this one. I'll be waiting in the comments.